Much, Mark. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer is scheduled to be on Capitol Hill today to attend a lunch to talk trade with Republican senators. Welcome now one of those senators. He's Mike Braun of Indiana, who sits on the Senate Agriculture Committee. He comes to us today from Capitol Hill. So, Senator, welcome back. It's great to have you here. When we've talked about this before, you've talked about the farmers in Indiana and, for that matter, throughout the upper Midwest, with the hopes that the China thing would get resolved so they could get some relief, because they really need the relief. At this point, it looks like we're in for the long haul. Are your farmers patient?
So when President Trump took on this whole challenge of not only shoring up with our main trading partners, Canada and Mexico, which, thank goodness, that got fleshed out last Friday, we needed to get that done because there are agricultural issues associated with that as well. When it comes to Chinese, I've always preached that not only whatever we do here to get through this, I inherently have a distrust that they will stick with it and that it will necessarily be good behavior down the road. So they were smart when they aimed those counter tariffs at farmers, Trump's most loyal group. I look at farming, because I've been doing it for over 30 years, still involved in it passively in terms of, I understand farming. Its issues go much deeper than just tariffs. Tariffs are kind of salt in the wound due to the fact that farmers are struggling with an industry increasingly concentrated with large corporations. Back 30, 40 years ago, farmers had suppliers that were mostly local businesses. Now they've been wrapped up into regional, national companies where you have 3 or 4 large corporations that dominate a lot of the areas, like seed corn, pesticides, herbicides. So we need to get tariffs straightened out in all other markets. We did that with the USMCA. China, I do feel it's going to be a longer-term proposition. And I know farmers do not want the help that Trump will probably give them to get them through it. I'm worried about what farmers do down the road dealing with high input costs and things much deeper and much worse than tariffs.
When you talk about the increasing concentration in a large agribusiness of the farming in the United States, is that going to be aggravated by an extended trade dispute? Because, as I say, right now it looks like this is not getting resolved anytime soon.
Whether that'll change the trend that's been going on for years, which is typical in a lot of industries. I compare the troubles that farmers are having with big ag is what doctors and nurses are having with big health care. When I took the insurance companies on 10 years ago in my own business to make it consumer-driven, to emphasize wellness, not remediation, for employees to have some skin in the game, shed light on a very cloaked process, it was tough because you were dealing then in healthcare with a concentrated industry. Same thing in farming. So I don't think necessarily this back and forth with China is going to have much impact on that. It is just another thing farmers deal with. Mostly small businesses. They got the weather. They got an asset-intensive occupation. They've got so many issues, and I challenge the industry to help them out, because once this all settles through with China, and now, thank goodness, USMCA is done, the farm economy's got problems much deeper to contend with.
So, to expanding the senator beyond farmers, let's talk generally about growth. President Trump came to office really promising growth. I know that's a priority of yours. We have economists now coming up with predictions that say if this goes on for an extended period of time, we could lose as much as 0.4% off of GDP in the United States. Now, there would be a worse hit for China, 0.6. But is that going to be a challenge for you with your constituents, and for that matter, in 2020 for the Republican Party, if we're going the opposite direction of pro-growth?
David, here's the way I look at it. Anything you do successfully in life, if you look at the short term only, you're probably going to make the wrong decision. It's the midterm and especially the long term. Whatever we're doing with China, everyone knows this isn't going to be easier 5 to 10 years down the road when they're the same size as us. And with all the things they do with intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, subsidizing industries, dumping the gluts, tariffs would be one of the nicest things they do as a country. We've got to address this head on. And what I love to hear a week to 10 days ago are businesses are now starting to look at their options outside of China, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia. In my own business, we chose not to get heavily involved with China because 10 years ago, I could see that was was going to be a risky proposition due to their autocratic political system. And, you know, they now are embracing capitalism, but not with the same rules that everybody else plays by. I'm glad to see companies are starting to hedge their bets. So in the mid-range, in the long term, they won't have these issues to deal with China, because I don't think they'll necessarily go away, even when they say they're going to mend their ways.
Senator, I want to come back to you. You mentioned USMCA, the successor to NAFTA, a couple of times. Now, we've had the steel and aluminum tariffs come off with respect to Canada and Mexico, but are we about to get ratification? Is that right up in the Congress to really get that thing done?
It better be the highest priority here, because that is the most important thing. We do more trade with both Canada and Mexico than we do with China, and they are generally friendly in nature. This was just to address some long-term things that were embedded that weren't fair, and that's been accomplished. So I'm hoping that it isn't used as a political football by the other side of the aisle, because it's going to be a Trump victory. And I'm hoping that you put partisanship aside, get this across the finish line. It'll not only benefit Hoosiers, it's going to benefit all Americans. And I would hope that Speaker Pelosi gets it across through their House with dispatch, because Americans expect it.
When you talk to people on the other side of the aisle, and it's largely a House issue as I understand it right now, well, they raise two things. One is enforcement. They want stronger enforcement mechanisms. The other is labor provisions, both of which are things that actually President Trump and his team really fought for and improved some on. Are you open to the possibility of taking it the next step? Because there's, at least in general, the principle is something that the Republicans have been in favor of.
If it is reasonable and not intended to delay or torpedo the agreement, I think it's worthy to discuss. But if it's going to delay in any fashion, I would view that as a political strategy. And I don't think, as much time as we've spent on it to get it to where it is now, that we should put up with that. And I hope that the House doesn't do that.
Okay, Senator, that's very plain and very direct. I really appreciate it. And that's Republican Senator Mike Braun from Indiana, coming to us today from Capitol Hill.